Before I tell you about the absolute explosion that happened next and how this night ended in handcuffs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and listen to the whole story. The smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing usually brings back good memories for most people. For me, it brings back the metallic taste of adrenaline and the sharp, undeniable clarity that my family was entirely broken. It was Thanksgiving Day. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, filled with the kind of heat that comes from too many bodies, a roaring fireplace, and decades of unspoken resentment. I was sitting at the heavy oak table in my parents' house in suburban Connecticut. The good crystal was out. The silver was polished. Everything looked like a perfect, glossy advertisement for the American family. But I knew better. I have always known better. My mother, Sarah, sat across from me. She was wearing a crisp maroon blouse, her hair perfectly styled, playing the role of the gracious hostess to absolute perfection. She leaned over the table, a tight, practiced smile plastered across her face, and slid a small, cream-colored envelope toward my plate. It landed next to my water glass with a soft tap. "For you, Mason," she said, her voice dripping with that artificial sweetness she always used when she wanted to make sure everyone in the room was watching her be generous. "Grandpa wanted to make sure you had a little something extra this year." I looked down at the envelope. I didn't open it immediately. I just stared at the thick paper, my jaw clenching slightly. I am 31 years old. I work as a senior cybersecurity analyst out in Denver. I spend my days hunting down digital ghosts, tracking stolen funds across international borders, and building firewalls that protect millions of dollars. I make a very good salary. I didn't need a handout, and my mother knew that. But this wasn't about money. This was about power. This was her way of reminding me of my place in the family hierarchy. To my right sat my younger brother, Matthew. Matthew was the golden child. He always had been. While I was taking out loans to pay for my degree, Matthew was driving a brand new car my parents bought him. While I was pulling all-nighters to secure a promotion at my firm, Matthew was posting photos of himself on yachts, courtesy of his wealthy fiancée, Julian, who was sitting right next to him, swirling an expensive glass of Cabernet. I picked up a silver butter knife, slid it under the flap of the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a personal check. I pulled it out. $200. It was made out to me. At the bottom right corner was my grandfather's signature. Arthur. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly uneven, showing the undeniable tremor of an 82-year-old man who had worked with his hands his entire life. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't the amount that bothered me. Grandpa Arthur was the only person in this family who ever gave a damn about me. If he wanted to give me $2, I would have framed it. What bothered me was the context. What bothered me was the smug, self-satisfied look on my mother's face, and the way Matthew was actively trying to hide a smirk behind his wine glass. They thought they had won. They thought they had pulled off the perfect crime. I looked at the head of the table. Grandpa Arthur stood there, a large carving knife in one hand, a long fork in the other. He looked older than he had the last time I saw him. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and his white hair was thin, but his eyes, those pale blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing, were sharp. He was meticulously slicing the turkey, his movements deliberate. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said. I kept my voice perfectly level. I made sure it was loud enough for the entire table to hear. "I really appreciate it. Thank you for the $200. The carving knife stopped moving. The silence that fell over the room wasn't gradual. It was instant. It was the kind of silence that sucks the oxygen right out of the air. The clinking of silverware stopped. Uncle Luke, who was mid-sentence about a golf game, snapped his mouth shut. Cousin Wyatt froze with a dinner roll halfway to his mouth. Grandpa Arthur slowly set the carving knife down on the silver platter. The metal clattered loudly against the dish. He planted both of his hands firmly on the edge of the table and leaned forward. He didn't look at my mother. He didn't look at Matthew. He looked straight down the length of the table, directly into my eyes. His brow furrowed in genuine confusion, But beneath that confusion, a dark, terrible storm was gathering. "What 200?" Grandpa asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the crystal glasses vibrate. I didn't blink. I picked up the check and held it up by the corner, making sure the numbers faced him. "The check, Grandpa. The $200 you gave Mom to give to me." My mother's chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "Dad, don't worry about it," she said, her voice suddenly an octave higher, tight and panicked. "Let's just eat before the food gets cold. You know how your memory gets when you skip your afternoon nap." "My memory is fine, Sarah," Grandpa barked, silencing her instantly. He didn't take his eyes off me. He took a slow, labored breath. The room was so quiet I could hear the logs crackling in the fireplace behind me. "Mason," Grandpa said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "The gift I wired you was $500,000. I watched my mother's face lose all its color. It didn't happen slowly. It was as if someone had pulled a plug at the base of her neck and drained every ounce of blood from her head. She went paper white, her mouth falling open slightly. Beside her, Matthew dropped his fork. It hit his china plate with a sharp, cracking sound. Julian, his fiancée, stiffened, his eyes darting frantically between me, my mother, and Grandpa. My father, David, who had been quietly eating his salad, slowly put his hands in his lap and stared at the tablecloth, refusing to look up. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't show an ounce of the rage that had been burning inside my chest for the last 72 hours. I just sat there, holding the $200 check in the air, watching the walls of their perfect, fabricated life begin to crumble around them. But to understand exactly how we got to this dining room, and why a $200 check was the smoking gun to a federal crime, we have to go back. We have to go back to 3 days earlier, when a phone call that was supposed to sound like brotherly love turned out to be the biggest mistake my family ever made. Let me tell you something about growing up in the shadow of a golden child. It changes the way you view the world. It teaches you very early on that love in some families is not unconditional. It is a finite resource, and if you aren't the favorite, you have to fight for scraps. Matthew is 4 years younger than me. From the moment he was born, my mother, Sarah, decided he was the center of her universe. I was the quiet kid, the one who liked taking apart old computers in the garage to see how the motherboards worked. Matthew was the loud, charismatic one. He played sports. He was the lead in the school plays. He needed constant attention, and my mother was more than happy to supply it. I remember sitting at the kitchen table when I was 18, holding an acceptance letter to a top-tier university for computer science. I was thrilled. I had worked 3 part-time jobs during high school just to save up for the application fees. When I showed the letter to my parents, my father patted me on the back, and my mother barely looked up from her magazine. "That's nice, Mason," she had said, "but we need to talk about tuition. We've decided we need to dip into your college fund to help pay for Matthew's private football coaching. You understand, right? You're smart. You can get loans. Matthew needs this for his future." I didn't argue. I just packed my bags, took out a mountain of student debt, and moved to Colorado. I built my life from scratch. I worked my way up the corporate ladder, moving from a junior IT guy to a senior cybersecurity analyst. I made a name for myself. I bought my own house. I built a life that had absolutely nothing to do with them. The only reason I ever went back east was for Grandpa Arthur. Grandpa was my shield. When I was a kid, he was the only one who would sit in the garage with me while I messed around with circuit boards. He was a retired structural engineer, a man who believed in hard work, logic, and building things that lasted. He saw through my mother's blatant favoritism, and he hated it. "You keep building, Mason," he used to tell me, his heavy, calloused hand resting on my shoulder. "Let them have the spotlight. The spotlight burns out. A solid foundation stands forever." When my grandmother passed away 5 years ago, the funeral was a nightmare. My mother spent the entire time treating the wake like a social networking event, making sure everyone saw how devastated she was. It was Grandpa and I who stood quietly by the casket. After the funeral, Grandpa pulled me aside. He told me he was setting up a joint bank account in both our names. "I'm putting some money in there," he had said, his voice thick with grief. "It's your cushion. If you ever need to buy a house or start a business, or if you just need a safety net, it's ours. Nobody else touches it. Not your mother, not your father, and certainly not Matthew." I had promised him I wouldn't touch it unless it was an absolute emergency. For 5 years, I kept that promise. I monitored the account out of habit, mostly just to make sure the bank wasn't charging weird maintenance fees, but the balance always hovered around $5,000. It was a comforting thought, knowing it was there. Until 3 days before Thanksgiving. It was a Monday evening. I was sitting in my home office in Denver, watching the snow fall outside my window, wrapping up a forensic audit for a corporate client. My phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed Matthew's name. I stared at it for a long moment. Matthew and I didn't talk. We didn't text. The only time he ever reached out was when he needed something, usually tech support for a laptop he spilled a protein shake on. I almost sent it to voicemail, but the holidays were coming up, and a small, stupid part of me thought maybe he was calling to coordinate travel plans from the airport. I picked it up. "Hello. Hey, Mason. Big bro. How's the frozen tundra?" Matthew's voice was too loud, too cheerful. It had that forced, artificial cadence of a salesman trying to hit a quota. "It's fine, Matthew. What do you need?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. "Wow, straight to business. I like it," he chuckled, though it sounded nervous. "Listen, I was actually calling about Thanksgiving this Thursday. Mom and I were talking, and we were thinking, maybe you should sit this one out." I stopped typing on my keyboard. The silence stretched between us. "Sit this one out?" I repeated slowly. "Yeah, man," Matthew said, his tone shifting into something that was supposed to sound sympathetic. "Look, Grandpa isn't doing so great. Dr. Gray came by last week, and he said Grandpa's heart is weak. He needs absolute peace and quiet. You know how stressful it gets when the whole family is together. Plus, flights from Denver last minute are, what, $1,000? You should save that money for yourself. Use it to pay down your mortgage or something. We'll FaceTime you during pie. It's better this way." I leaned back in my chair. My eyes narrowed. Matthew giving financial advice? Matthew caring about my mortgage? That was the first red flag. The second was Grandpa's health. I had spoken to Grandpa Arthur on FaceTime just 2 days ago. He had been out in his yard, fixing a broken latch on his garden gate. He looked tired, sure, but his mind was sharp, and he certainly wasn't on his deathbed. "Dr. Gray said he needs peace and quiet?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "Exactly." Matthew jumped on the agreement too fast. Any excitement could be really bad for him. Mom is super stressed about it. So, just stay in Denver, enjoy the snow, and we'll see you at Christmas. "Maybe." "All right," I said. "Thanks for letting me know, Matthew." "Anytime. Bro, love you." He hung up before I could reply. I put the phone down on my desk. The silence in my office felt heavy. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my arms were standing up. In my line of work, you learn to trust that instinct. When a system administrator suddenly tells you not to check a specific server because it's under maintenance, that's the server you check first. When my brother, who hasn't cared about my existence in a decade, suddenly cares about my travel expenses and Grandpa's stress levels, there is a fire burning somewhere, and he is trying to hide the smoke. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Grandpa. Instead, I pulled up a new tab on my secure browser. I logged into my banking portal. I navigated to the joint account I shared with Grandpa Arthur. I hadn't looked at it in a few months. My heart was beating a steady, rhythmic thud against my ribs. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe my mother had convinced Grandpa to drain the $5,000 to pay for catering. Maybe Matthew had somehow gotten a hold of the debit card number. The dashboard loaded. I looked at the balance. Available balance, $5,247.18. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was fine. The money was still there. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling foolish. I was letting my paranoia get the best of me. Matthew was probably just being his usual selfish self, not wanting me around to steal attention from him and his fancy new fiancée. I reached for my mouse to close the window, but my hand stopped. I am an analyst. I don't look at summaries. I look at data. I clicked on the tab that said, Transaction History. I set the filter to show the last 6 months. The screen refreshed, pulling up a long list of minor interest accruals and the occasional small deposit Grandpa made from his pension. I scrolled down, and then my stomach dropped straight into the floor. There, sitting in the middle of the screen, were 2 lines of text that made the blood in my veins turn to ice water. August 14th. Incoming wire transfer origin, Arthur Vanguard Investments. Amount, $500,000. Memo, for Mason. Build something lasting. August 15th. Outgoing wire transfer, destination. External account ending in 7392. Amount, $499,800. Memo, investment transfer. I stared at the screen. I stopped breathing. The numbers blurred together, and for a second, a wave of pure, unadulterated nausea washed over me. $500,000. Grandpa had wired $500,000 into our joint account. A life-changing amount of money, an inheritance given early, and less than 24 hours later, almost all of it was gone. My eyes locked onto the math. $500,000 came in. $499,800 went out. $200. They left exactly $200 of the transferred money behind. My hands curled into fists on my desk. I knew exactly what that was. That wasn't a mistake. That was a calculated, deliberate move. In banking software, if a massive deposit hits an account and is immediately drained to zero, it triggers a high-level automated fraud alert. The algorithms flag it as a potential account takeover or money laundering scheme. But if you leave a fraction of the funds behind, just enough to keep the account active and looking like a normal transaction, it often bypasses the first layer of security checks. Whoever took this money wasn't an amateur. They had planned this. And then I realized what Matthew's phone call was really about. If I didn't come to Thanksgiving, I wouldn't see Grandpa. If I didn't see Grandpa, Grandpa couldn't ask me what I was going to do with the $500,000 he sent me. They were buying time. They thought they could keep me away long enough to cover their tracks, or maybe gaslight Grandpa into thinking he never sent it at all. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the standard customer service line. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't used in 2 years. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Elijah, I said, my voice tight. Mason? Well, I'll be damned. Long time no see, man. You still freezing your ass off in Denver? Elijah was a former colleague of mine, a guy who had moved from private sector cybersecurity over to the fraud division of the very bank my grandpa and I used. He was brilliant, ruthless, and owed me a massive favor for helping him untangle a ransomware attack back in 2021. I need a favor, Eli. A big one. And it needs to be off the books for about 10 minutes. His tone shifted instantly. The jovial greeting vanished. Give me the account number. I read it to him. I heard the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard on his end. All right, I'm in, Elijah said. What am I looking at? August 14th and 15th. A wire in for $500K. A wire out for $499,800. I need to know where that outgoing wire went, and I need to know who authorized it. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Elijah breathing. Jesus, Mason. Okay, let me dig into the authorization logs. More typing. All right, the outgoing wire was initiated online. IP address traces back to a residential ISP in Stamford, Connecticut, my parents' town. Who authorized it? I demanded. The account requires dual signatures for transfers over $50,000. Hold on, Elijah muttered, checking the document repository. Yeah, here it is. The dual signature requirement was overridden. Someone uploaded a power of attorney form on August 10th. It grants full financial control of your grandfather's assets to a primary beneficiary. Who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sarah Graves. Your mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own mother. I felt a surge of violent anger clawing its way up my throat. She doesn't have a power of attorney, I growled. Grandpa is perfectly lucid. He would never sign that. I'm looking at the document right now, Mason. It's notarized. It has your grandfather's signature. And, wait, it has your signature on it, too. You signed away your rights to the joint account. I stood up from my desk so fast my chair crashed into the wall behind me. I never signed anything, Elijah. Pull the PDF. Send it to my encrypted email right now. Sending, he said. Mason, if this is what it looks like, this is a federal felony. Wire fraud, elder abuse, forgery. You need to call the authorities. Not yet, I said coldly. Where did the money go, Eli? What's the destination account? The receiving account ending in 7392. Elijah read off the screen. It's a corporate account registered in Delaware. The entity name is Golden Years LLC. Thank you, Eli. I owe you. I hung up. My email pinged. I opened the encrypted file Elijah sent me. It was a scanned copy of a legal document. Durable power of attorney for financial management. It looked incredibly official. There were stamps, legal jargon, and a notary seal from some strip mall office in Stanford. I scrolled down to the last page. There were the signatures. My grandfather's signature was there, and it looked authentic enough to pass a casual glance. But then I looked at mine. Mason Graves. It was good. It was terrifyingly good. The slant of the M, the heavy pressure on the downstroke of the G. It looked exactly like the signature I used on my driver's license. Whoever forged this had practiced. They had spent hours tracing it, perfecting the speed and the loops so it wouldn't look like a slow, shaky imitation. But my mother, in all her arrogance, didn't know everything about me. Years ago, when I started working in cybersecurity, handling sensitive contracts and non-disclosure agreements, a mentor taught me a trick. He told me to build a trap door into my signature. Something microscopic that a forger wouldn't notice, but that I could use in court to prove a document was fake. Every time I sign a legally binding document, I do not connect the bottom loop of the S in Graves to the E, and, right below the final S, I tap the pen once, leaving a tiny, barely visible dot of ink. I zoomed in on the PDF on my massive monitor. I zoomed in until the pixels started to blur. The S was perfectly connected to the E, and there was no dot. I leaned heavily on my desk, burying my face in my hands. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly disgusting, that it transcended anger. My mother had sat at her dining room table, probably drinking her expensive wine, and meticulously practiced stealing my name. She had forged my identity to rob an 82-year-old man who trusted her. She had gutted my grandfather's life savings so she could play the wealthy socialite. At that moment, any lingering shred of familial obligation evaporated. I didn't have a mother anymore. I didn't have a brother. I had two targets, and I was going to systematically destroy them. I didn't sleep that night. I brewed a pot of black coffee and treated my family like a hostile cyber threat. I needed to know exactly where that $500,000 went. I texted Samuel, my best friend from college who was now a ruthless corporate litigation lawyer in Chicago. Need a fast public records pull. Delaware LLC. Golden Years LLC. Founded sometime around August. Samuel texted back 20 minutes later with a screenshot of a business registry. Golden Years LLC. Registered agent, Julian Roth. Principal member, Julian Roth. Julian, Matthew's fiancé. The smug, perfectly groomed investment consultant who had been dating my brother for 2 years. Suddenly, the pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. My mother didn't just steal the money. She laundered it through her future son-in-law to make it disappear. I opened a dummy Instagram account I used for threat intelligence gathering and searched for Matthew's public profile. Matthew wasn't the type to hide his life. His entire existence was based on external validation. His feed was a continuous stream of filtered photos, expensive dinners, and luxury vacations. I scrolled back to mid-August. August 10th, the day the fake power of attorney was filed. A photo of Matthew and my mother at a high-end spa, holding champagne flutes. Caption: Spa Day with the Queen. Hashtag blessed. August 14th. The day the $500,000 hit the account. Silence. No posts. August 15th. The day the money vanished. Silence. August 18th. 3 days after the theft. A video of Matthew squealing in a dealership parking lot. The camera pans to a brand new, midnight blue Porsche Macan with a giant red bow on the hood. Julian is standing next to it, smiling like a savior. Caption: OMG! Julian surprised me with my dream car. Best early wedding present ever. He's been working so hard on his new investment firm and it's paying off. I'm literally crying. Hashtag Porsche, hashtag fiancé of the year, hashtag rich life. I felt sick to my stomach. I looked up the MSRP for a fully loaded Porsche Macan. $85,000. I kept scrolling. September 2nd, photos from a first-class flight to the Maldives. September 15th, a close-up of Matthew's hand resting on the steering wheel of the Porsche, casually showing off a massive, diamond-encrusted Cartier watch. October, photos of my mother's newly renovated kitchen, custom marble countertops, professional-grade Viking appliances. They were spending Grandpa's money. They were literally parading his life savings around on the internet, slapping filters on it, and begging strangers for likes. They had taken a gift meant to build something lasting and turned it into leased cars and kitchen cabinets. I took screenshots of everything. Every post, every timestamp, every caption. I downloaded the videos. I built a digital dossier that was bulletproof. By the time the sun came up over the Rocky Mountains, I had a folder on my desktop named Thanksgiving. Inside were 52 pieces of hard, irrefutable evidence of felony wire fraud. I picked up my phone, opened my text messages, and clicked on Matthew's name. Hey Matt, looked at my schedule. I got my shifts covered. I'm booking a flight now. See you Thursday. I hit send. I didn't wait for his reply. I closed my laptop and went to pack. I didn't pack clothes for a long weekend. I packed for a tactical extraction. I went to a local office supply store right when it opened. I walked down the aisles with a cold, singular focus. I bought 5 heavy-duty, black leather-bound presentation folders. The kind lawyers use when they are handing over discovery documents in a massive corporate lawsuit. I bought a ream of high-quality, thick paper. When I got home, I hooked up my laser printer. I printed everything. I printed the bank statements showing the exact moment the $500K entered the account and the $499.8K left. I highlighted the $200 left behind in bright, screaming yellow ink. I printed the forged power of attorney. I printed an enlarged, high-resolution comparison of my real signature side by side with my mother's forgery, circling the missing trapdoor dot in red marker. I printed the Delaware registry papers proving Julian owned Golden Years LLC. And finally, I printed glossy, full-color pages of Matthew's Instagram posts. The Porsche, the Cartier watch, the Maldives, the kitchen renovation. Next to each photo, I typed out the estimated cost of the items. I punched holes in the paper and bound them perfectly into the 5 black folders. They were heavy. They felt like bricks in my hands. They were the physical manifestation of my family's betrayal. I put 4 of the folders into my hardshell carry-on suitcase. The 5th folder I slid into my laptop bag. My phone buzzed constantly during the drive to the Denver airport. It was Matthew panicking. Bro, you really don't have to come. Seriously, Mom is freaking out about the cooking. We don't have enough food. Mason, Grandpa is really tired today. It's a bad idea. I ignored them all. I walked through airport security, boarded my flight, and watched the snow-capped mountains disappear beneath the clouds. I wasn't nervous. I felt an eerie, unnatural calm. The kind of calm a demolition expert feels right before they push the detonator. The Uber dropped me off at the end of my parents' long driveway on Thursday afternoon. The sky was an overcast, slate gray, and the air was biting cold. Parked right in front of the two-car garage, gleaming obnoxiously, was the midnight blue Porsche Macan. I stood there for a moment, just staring at it. I could almost see Grandpa Arthur's hard-earned pension bleeding through the expensive paint job. I gripped the handle of my suitcase, the wheels grinding against the pavement as I walked up to the front door. I didn't knock. I just walked in. The house smelled like roasted meat, expensive candles, and sheer panic. "Mason!" My mother practically shrieked from the kitchen. She came bustling out, wiping her hands on an immaculate apron. Her smile was so wide, so tight, it looked like it was causing her physical pain. She threw her arms around me, pressing her cheek against mine. "You made it. We are so happy you're here, even though it's such a surprise." "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my arms at my sides. I didn't hug her back. Matthew emerged from the living room, a glass of wine in his hand. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. The Cartier watch flashed on his wrist. He looked pale, his eyes darting to my suitcase and then to my face. "Hey, bro," Matthew said, giving me a stiff, one-armed bro hug. "Glad you could make it, despite the flight costs." "I found a deal," I said flatly. Julian, the fiancé, was standing by the fireplace, looking like he had just stepped out of a GQ magazine. He gave me a curt nod. "Mason, good to see you." "Julian," I replied. "Business is good, I hear? The new investment firm doing well." Julian's smile faltered for a microsecond. "Can't complain. Just grinding away." "I bet you are," I said softly. "Where's Grandpa?" I asked, looking past them. "Oh, he's resting in the den," my mother said quickly, moving to block the hallway. "Dr. Gray said he really needs to limit his excitement, Mason. So please, let's keep the conversation light today. No heavy topics. He's very fragile." "I'll be gentle," I said, stepping smoothly around her. I found Grandpa Arthur sitting in a leather recliner in the den, watching a football game. When he saw me, his face lit up. It was the only genuine smile I had seen in this house in years. He struggled to stand, but I rushed over and hugged him gently. He felt frail, his bones sharp against my arms, but his grip was strong. "Mason," he said, patting my back. "I didn't think you were coming. Matthew told me you had to work." I pulled back and looked at him. "I wouldn't miss it, Grandpa. Not this year." For the next 2 hours, I played their game. I sat in the living room, sipping water, watching the performance. I watched my mother brag to Uncle Luke about the new kitchen countertops, claiming she saved up for years to afford the marble. I watched Matthew show off his watch to Cousin Wyatt, spinning a lie about how Julian bought it for him as a reward for closing a big deal. Every word out of their mouths was a lie paid for by the old man sitting quietly in the corner. I kept my briefcase right next to my feet. I waited. I waited until the food was on the table. I waited until everyone was seated, trapped in their chairs by social convention. I waited until my mother handed me that envelope with the $200 check. And then I pulled the pin. Let's go back to that dining room table. The air was so thick you could cut it with the silver carving knife sitting next to the roasted turkey. My grandfather had just dropped the bomb that shattered the perfect illusion. "The gift I wired you was $500,000. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a physical weight pressing down on the room. I watched my mother, Sarah. I watched her brain misfire as it tried to process the fact that her perfect crime was unraveling in real time. She sat completely frozen for 3 agonizing seconds. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, looking at the crystal glasses, the mashed potatoes, the faces of our extended family, looking for any possible way out of the trap. She tried to force a laugh, came out sounding like a dry, desperate heave. "Dad, you are confused," she said, her voice shaking so badly it vibrated. She reached out and patted the air in his direction. "You didn't wire $500,000 to anyone. Your medication is making your memory fuzzy again. Remember what Dr. Gray warned us about? He said the blood pressure pills might cause these little episodes. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated disgust burn the back of my throat. She was gaslighting him right in front of the entire family. She was actively using his age and his health as a weapon against him to cover up her felony. She was willing to let everyone at this table think this proud, brilliant man was losing his mind, just to protect her stolen wealth. I am not confused, Sarah, Grandpa said. He leaned heavily on the edge of the heavy oak table, his knuckles turning white. His voice was like grinding stones. I went to the bank. I sat with the teller. I authorized the transfer. I wanted Mason to have his inheritance early so I could watch him build his life while I am still here to see it. Where is the money? My mother opened her mouth to spin another lie, but I didn't let her. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I reached down to the floor and picked up my heavy leather briefcase. I hoisted it up and set it directly on the dining room table, right next to the gravy boat. I popped the brass latches. The sharp click-clack echoed loudly in the silent room. I reached inside and pulled out the 5 thick, black leather-bound presentation folders. They were heavy, filled with high-gloss paper and undeniable facts. I slid the first one down the polished wood of the table directly to Grandpa Arthur. I handed the second one to Uncle Luke, who was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. I tossed the third one right in front of my father, David. I kept one for myself, and I left the last one sitting in the center of the table. Open them, I said. Nobody moved. They just stared at the black covers like they were explosive devices. I said, open them. I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. Uncle Luke hesitated, his hands trembling slightly, then flipped open the heavy black cover. Grandpa put on his wire-rimmed reading glasses and opened his copy. Turn to page 1, I instructed. My voice was completely flat. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to yell. The truth was loud enough to deafen them. Page 1 is a certified, stamped bank statement from the joint account Grandpa and I share. Look at the date, August 14th. You will see an incoming wire transfer of exactly $500,000. Grandpa traced the line on the paper with his thick, wrinkled finger. Yes, he whispered, his voice catching slightly. That is my transfer. That is my life savings. Now look at the very next line, I said. I stepped away from my chair and began slowly walking around the perimeter of the table, pacing like a prosecutor in a courtroom. August 15th. Less than 24 hours later. An outgoing wire transfer of $499,800. Leaving exactly $200 behind in the account. The exact amount of the check Mom just smiled and handed to me 5 minutes ago. Uncle Luke gasped loudly. He looked up at my mother, his eyes wide with absolute horror. Sarah, what is this? What did you do? It is a lie, my mother shrieked. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward and crashed violently to the floor. She pointed a shaking finger at me. Mason works with computers. He faked these documents. He printed these out in his basement. He is trying to steal your money, Dad. And he is framing me because he has always been jealous of Matthew. I didn't even look at her. I ignored her completely. Turn to page 2. I heard the heavy rustle of thick paper as Uncle Luke, Grandpa, and now my father turned the page. Page 2 is a durable power of attorney document, I explained, stopping behind my empty chair. It was filed with the bank on August 10th. It grants Sarah Graves full, unrestricted control over Grandpa's financial assets. It has Grandpa's signature at the bottom. And right next to it, it has my signature, supposedly waiving all my legal rights to the joint account. I never signed this, Grandpa whispered. A tear slipped down his weathered cheek, landing on the paper. I never gave her control. I would never do that. I know you didn't, Grandpa, I said softly, looking at him. Then my eyes hardened as I looked across the table. And neither did I. Everyone, look closely at the red circle I drew on that page. Look at my signature. I handle highly classified corporate contracts for my salary. When I sign my name on anything legally binding, I leave a microscopic dot of ink right under the last letter. It is a security habit I learned years ago to prevent exactly this. The signature on that paper is a masterful, perfect forgery. But it is missing the dot. Mom practiced tracing my name for hours, but she missed the security trap. Matthew was hyperventilating now. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white, his chest heaving. "Mom!" he gasped, sounding like a terrified child. "Mom! Tell them it isn't true. Mom! Do something. Fix this." "Turn to page 3, I commanded, my voice cutting through Matthew's panic like a blade. This was the kill shot. This was the moment the entire house of cards was going to come crashing down on their heads. The money didn't just disappear into thin air. It was wired to a corporate account registered in Delaware under the name Golden Years LLC. I said. I stopped walking and stood directly behind Julian, Matthew's perfectly groomed, wealthy fiancé. Julian was sitting rigidly in his chair, staring straight ahead, a bead of sweat forming at his hairline. Page 3 is the official state registry for Golden Years LLC. You will see the registered owner, the sole beneficiary, and the principal member is Julian Roth. The man sitting right there. Every single head at the table snapped toward Julian. Uncle Luke looked like he was going to be sick. Julian's fake, expensive spray tan suddenly looked like a sickly, ashen shade of gray. "Julian." Matthew's voice cracked. He reached out to touch Julian's arm. "Julian, what is he talking about? Tell them he's lying." "Turn to page 4, I said, my voice rising just enough to maintain total control of the room. "Let's look at where Grandpa's life savings actually went." "You hacked my phone," Matthew screamed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly styled hair. "You violated my privacy. You can't use that. You posted it publicly on the internet, you absolute idiot." I shot back, the anger finally bleeding into my voice. "You stole $500,000 from your own grandfather, and you bragged about it to thousands of strangers online. It was an investment," my mother cried out. She was completely cornered, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. The lies were unraveling faster than her brain could spin them. Julian was going to invest it for us. We were going to double the money and give it back to Dad. We were trying to help the family grow our wealth. "Dad, please, you have to believe me. Julian doesn't have an investment firm," I stated clearly, driving the final nail into the coffin. "My lawyer pulled his licensing records yesterday afternoon. Julian is a mid-level sales rep who is drowning in $90,000 of credit card debt. Golden Years LLC is a shell company, produces nothing, sells nothing. It was created solely to launder stolen money across state lines." Julian stood up abruptly. His chair scraped violently against the floor, almost tipping over. He didn't look at Matthew. He didn't look at my mother. He looked directly at me. Julian was a lot of things, but he wasn't stupid. He recognized a completely lost battle when he saw one. In the corporate world, when the ship is taking on water and the feds are circling, the rats jump ship first to save themselves. "I am out," Julian said. His voice was cold, clipped, and completely devoid of the charming, warm facade he had displayed just an hour ago. "Julian, wait, where are you going?" Matthew cried, jumping up and reaching out to grab his fiancée's arm. Julian yanked his arm away with such force that Matthew stumbled backward. "Don't touch me," Julian snarled, his face contorted in panic and rage. "I told your mother this was too risky. I told her the bank would flag a massive withdrawal from a retirement fund. I only set up the LLC because she swore to me that you all agreed to it as an early inheritance. I am not going to federal prison for your insane, toxic family." Julian reached into his tailored suit pocket. He pulled out the small velvet box that held the matching Cartier engagement ring, the ring he had bought with my grandfather's stolen money. He tossed it onto the table. It landed right in the center of the mashed potatoes. "Consider the engagement off," Julian said. adjusting his cuffs with shaking hands. "Do not contact me. I am calling my lawyer." Julian turned on his heel and walked fast toward the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, rattling the picture frames on the hallway wall. Matthew collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The golden child, the boy who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life, was finally hitting a wall he couldn't charm or cry his way over. His perfect, curated life was reduced to rubble in less than 10 minutes. My mother was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she stared at the door Julian had just walked through. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her. She looked wildly at my father. "David, do something," she begged, her voice shrill and desperate. "Tell him to stop this. Talk to your son." My father, who had been dead silent this entire time, staring at the black folder in front of him, finally looked up from his untouched plate. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked small. He looked incredibly weak. "Mason, please," my father said softly, his voice trembling. "Put the folders away. Let's just sit down. Your mother made a terrible, terrible mistake. She let her desire to provide for Matthew get completely out of hand. But we are family. We can fix this without tearing each other apart. We can sell the Porsche. We can stop the kitchen renovations and get a refund on the materials. We will pay Grandpa back every single cent over time. Just please, Mason, do not do this. Do not destroy this family." I stared at the man who had raised me. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the dead center of my chest. It was a realization so ugly, so profound, that it almost took my breath away. "You knew?" I realized aloud, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He couldn't maintain eye contact. He looked down at his lap. He knew. He sat in this house every single day, eating meals prepared in a kitchen paid for by stolen money, watching his youngest son drive a stolen luxury car, and he did absolutely nothing. He let his wife forge my signature. He let his wife rob his own 82-year-old father-in-law because he was too much of a coward to stand up to her. He preferred the peace of a quiet house over the integrity of his own soul. "You are just as guilty as she is," I said, my voice filled with a quiet, terrifying disgust. "You watched them steal Grandpa's security, you watched them steal my name, and you let it happen. You are an accomplice. You don't have a son named Mason anymore. Lose my number." I turned my attention away from the pathetic man I used to call my father and looked back to the head of the table. Grandpa Arthur was standing tall. The slight hunch in his shoulders, the frailty I had seen earlier, was completely gone. He looked like the structural engineer he used to be. A man made of steel, concrete, and unyielding mathematics, inspecting a bridge that had catastrophically failed due to cheap materials. He looked at my mother. "Sarah," Grandpa said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any warmth or paternal affection. "Pack your things. You and the boy have exactly 2 hours to get your belongings out of my house." "Dad, no. Please," she begged, falling to her knees on the hardwood floor, tears ruining her perfect makeup. "This is my home. Where are we supposed to go?" "I pay the mortgage," Grandpa reminded her coldly, looking down at her like she was a stranger asking for spare change. "I bought this house. I let you live here rent-free so you could save money for your future. Clearly, you used that opportunity to plot how to rob me blind. Get out, before I pick up that telephone and have the police escort you off the property in handcuffs." My mother opened her mouth to argue, to scream, to plead again, but the look in Grandpa's eyes stopped her dead. It was the look of a man who had completely and permanently severed a blood tie. There was no coming back from this. The rest of the evening was a surreal blur of frantic, humiliating packing. Uncle Luke and Cousin Wyatt left immediately, muttering awkward apologies to Grandpa, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the nuclear fallout. I sat in the den with Grandpa. We didn't turn the television on. We just sat in the quiet, drinking black coffee, listening to the frantic thudding of footsteps upstairs. We listened to the sounds of my mother and brother dragging heavy suitcases down the wooden stairs, sobbing and arguing with each other. My father quietly, pathetically helped them load the bags into the trunk of his sedan. They didn't come into the den to say goodbye. They didn't offer a final apology. They just got into the car, started the engine, and drove away into the freezing, pitch-black November night. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant, unforgiving, icy blue. I didn't call the local police department. Local police handle noise complaints, domestic disputes, and stolen bicycles. I am a senior cybersecurity analyst. I know exactly how to handle high-level interstate financial crimes. After a quiet breakfast of toast and more black coffee, Grandpa and I got into my rental car. We drove 40 miles past the suburbs, straight to the nearest Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. We sat in a sterile, brightly lit conference room with a special agent who specialized in white-collar crime and elder financial abuse. I handed the federal agent one of the black folders. I gave him Elijah's direct contact information at the bank's fraud department. I gave him the routing numbers, the IP addresses, the forged documents, and the registry for Golden Years LLC. The agent sat in silence for 20 minutes, slowly looking through the folder, his eyebrows rising higher and higher with every page he turned. When he reached the end, he closed the thick black cover and let out a low whistle. "You did our entire job for us, Mr. Graves," the agent said, looking at me with genuine respect. "We have dedicated task forces that take months to build a paper trail this clean. We will be issuing immediate, federal freeze orders on all bank accounts associated with Sarah Graves, Matthew Graves, and Julian Roth by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Nobody is moving a dime." It was over. The tumor had been surgically, permanently cut out. The wheels of the federal justice system turn incredibly slowly, but when they finally grind down, they crush absolutely everything in their path. 6 months passed. The federal prosecutors did not offer a generous plea deal. They rarely do when the evidence is handed to them on a silver platter. Elder financial abuse, combined with wire fraud, identity theft, and laundering money across state lines, carries severe mandatory penalties. My mother and brother tried to hire a high-powered, expensive defense lawyer to fight the charges, but they couldn't even pay his initial retainer fee because all of their assets, every single bank account, credit card, and investment portfolio, were frozen solid by the federal government. They ended up with an overworked public defender who took one single look at my black folder, saw the forged signature and the IP address logs, and told them to plead guilty to minimize the damage and avoid a lengthy, humiliating trial. I flew back east for the final sentencing hearing. The federal courtroom was vast, intimidating, and quiet, smelling heavily of polished wood, floor wax, and impending doom. I sat alone in the back row of the gallery. I didn't sit with my father. He sat 2 rows ahead of me, his shoulders slumped so far forward, he looked like he carried the weight of the world. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him at Thanksgiving. The judge did not mince his words when he delivered the sentence. He looked down from the bench with absolute disgust. He called their actions a predatory, highly calculated betrayal of the most sacred familial trust, driven by nothing but vanity and grotesque greed. Sarah Graves, my mother, received 18 months in a federal correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and mandatory restitution. Matthew Graves, the golden child who could do no wrong, received 12 months. I watched the federal bailiff step forward, ask them to stand, and place them in handcuffs. I watched them be led away through the side door. My mother looked back at me over her shoulder one last time, her eyes filled with a toxic, swirling mixture of anger, blame, and disbelief. Matthew was just crying silently, his shoulders shaking in his cheap suit. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the urge to cry. I just felt an overwhelming, incredible sense of relief. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood, the constant feeling of not being good enough, the manipulation, the favoritism was finally permanently gone. The financial fallout was absolute and devastating for them. The midnight blue Porsche Macan was seized by federal marshals and sold at a government auction. The custom marble kitchen was torn out by angry contractors who slapped a mechanic's lien on my father's house because my mother's checks had all bounced. Julian managed to avoid serving hard prison time by immediately turning state's evidence. He flipped on my mother the second the FBI knocked on his door, handing over all emails and text messages proving she was the mastermind behind funding the LLC. He walked away with a massive, crippling federal fine, 5 years of probation, and a completely ruined career in the finance sector. No reputable firm would ever hire him to manage money again. As for Grandpa Arthur, he didn't want to stay in Connecticut anymore. The large house held far too many dark, painful memories of the daughter who tried to ruin him. 3 weeks after the sentencing hearing, I flew out, rented a moving truck, and helped him pack up the things that mattered. We left the heavy furniture behind. We drove across the country together, taking our time, stopping at roadside diners, drinking bad coffee, and looking at the vastness of the mountains as we crossed into Colorado. He moved into the large guest bedroom of my house in Denver. It took a few months for his 82-year-old lungs to adjust to the high altitude, but soon enough, he was out in my backyard, wearing his old work gloves, building a massive, beautiful cedar deck with his own 2 hands. We fell into a quiet, incredibly comfortable routine. We drank coffee on the back porch in the crisp mornings. We watched baseball games in the evenings. For the very first time in my entire life, I had a family environment that felt genuinely safe. There was no walking on eggshells. There was no competing for affection. One evening in late spring, while we were sitting on that brand new cedar deck, watching the sun dip behind the Rockies, Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a thick manila envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside were legal documents, heavily stamped and notarized, prepared by my friend Samuel, the corporate lawyer in Chicago. It was a completely new trust fund. I recovered most of the money, Grandpa said quietly, staring out at the mountains catching the pink and orange sunset. The FBI seized the LLC assets, liquidated what they could from Julian and your mother, and returned it. It is all sitting in this new trust. It requires dual authorization for any withdrawal, managed independently by Samuel's law firm, and it is entirely legally in your name. I looked down at the dense legal paperwork, seeing the numbers printed on the page. Grandpa, you don't have to do this. I told you I make a very good salary. I don't need the money to survive. Grandpa reached over and placed his heavy, calloused hand firmly over mine. I know you don't need it to survive, Mason, he said, his pale blue eyes locking onto mine. That is exactly why I want you to have it. You protect what matters. You built a solid foundation when no one else was helping you. Family is not about shared blood. Blood just means you are biologically related. Family is about protection. You protected me when I was vulnerable. Now, I want you to use this to protect your future. Consider it your ultimate promotion. I didn't argue with him this time. I took the pen he offered me. I signed the paperwork, making absolutely sure to include the tiny, microscopic dot under the last letter of my name. The mail carrier dropped a large stack of letters onto my front porch yesterday afternoon. I brought it inside, sorting through the utility bills and the glossy junk mail advertisements until I found a thick, plain white envelope. There was no return address written on it, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. The loopy, dramatic, sweeping script belonged to Matthew. The postmark stamped across the top corner was from a low-security federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. I stood in my kitchen and held the envelope in my hands for a long moment. I could feel the sheer thickness of the folded pages inside. It was probably 8 or 10 pages long. Knowing Matthew, knowing the way his mind worked, it was likely filled with endless excuses, sob stories about how hard the prison food is, complaints about his cellmate, and desperate demands for me to put money into his commissary account so he could buy better snacks. Maybe, if I dug deep enough, there was a fake, highly conditional apology buried somewhere in paragraph 4. 10 years ago, I would have opened it. I would have read every single agonizing word, letting his guilt, his manipulation, and his toxic energy poison my entire day. I would have agonized for weeks over whether I should reply, whether I owed him a second chance because he was my brother. But I am not that person anymore. I walked out of my kitchen and down the hall into my home office. I walked past the framed cybersecurity certifications hanging on my wall. I walked right up to the heavy-duty, cross-cut paper shredder sitting next to my oak desk. I reached out and flipped the power switch. The machine hummed to life with a low, hungry growl. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't even bend the flap to peek inside. I just held it directly over the feeding slot, let go of the paper, and watched the steel blades pull it down into the darkness. The loud, aggressive grinding noise filled the quiet room as 8 pages of toxic history, manipulation, and lies were violently turned into tiny, unreadable strips of confetti. It was, without a doubt, the best sound in the entire world. People often talk about forgiveness like it is a mandatory requirement for moving on with your life. They tell you that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But what they don't tell you is that setting a hard, impenetrable boundary is not the same thing as holding on to anger. Setting a boundary is an act of pure self-preservation. You do not owe your peace of mind, your time, or your resources to people who actively tried to destroy your life, no matter how much DNA you happen to share with them. My mother and brother tried to use my name, my grandfather's trust, and our family history as a weapon to fund their vanity. I took that weapon away, broke it in half in front of them, and walked away. I am building something lasting now, just like Grandpa told me to, and my front door only opens for people who respect the foundation. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, but it is the harsh reality of what happens when greed and favoritism infect a family. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you have ever felt like the outsider or the scapegoat in your own home. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand with your own family members to protect yourself and your sanity? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I try to reply to as many as I can. If you made it all the way to this exact moment, hearing the shredder destroy that letter, you are part of the true core of this channel. You are part of the 1% club. Prove it to me by commenting the letter W for winner down below. It is our secret handshake, letting me know you are one of the amazing, strong people who stayed until the very end. Please hit that like button if you support the way I handled things, and make sure to follow and subscribe so we can keep sharing these incredible journeys together. Until next time, stay safe, trust your gut, and always protect your peace.